Hey everyone, I'm Jay and welcome to the next video in my series, Intro to HTML and CSS. Today we'll be covering Chapter 2 of our books. Part 1, break Chapter 2 into 2 parts. We're going to cover the initial basics of the coded portion of HTML. Last module we talked about how the internet itself worked. Now we're going to get into some of the code of HTML, and we're talking about the fundamental building blocks of how that works. So let's get started. First, everything in HTML is created of various different kinds of elements, and every element is essentially a box. That box is going to have a width and a height, and it's going to have some content. It's going to have maybe a background color or a text color or a border color or a rounded border, some paddings and margin around it, some positioning, all of these things, but it's still a box. Even if you round all the corners and you make it a complete circle, it's still a box. It just has invisible corners. You can have images, you can have videos, but they're still boxes, right? So everything is going to be a box, and the way we define those boxes, the way we write them, we're going to use something called HTML tags. And so if you hear me say tags or elements, I kind of sometimes use them interchangeably. When I refer to elements, I'm talking about the complete element, and usually when I refer to a tag, I'm talking about either the beginning tag or the ending tag, because like I said, these boxes will have content in them, so you need to mark the beginning and mark the ending, and then fill in all the content that goes in there. So the way we write these, we have a beginning tag right here. This is an HTML tag. The beginning tags are going to have whatever the name of it is, surrounded by a greater than and less than symbol. That's the beginning tag. The ending tag is going to be the exact same thing, except right before the name of it is going to have this forward slash. The forward slash is the one where the top of it is laying forward towards the direction that we read, okay, to the right. And so that's the ending tag. That's also going to have the greater than, less than around it, right? Labels or tags, they're always going to be lowercase. And there are a few elements that don't have any content, and so these tags don't need an opening and closing tag. They just need one tag. For example, an image tag doesn't have any content. It has the image, and we're going to define that as an attribute, which is the next slide. But it has no content. You can't put content inside the image. And so there is no opening and closing. There's just the opening. It's also referred to as a self-closing tag. And in XHTML, we always put the slash in at the end, but in HTML5, that's optional. Okay. So let's talk about what attributes are, since we said that attributes are a thing with images. Attributes are, let's take a look at this image, for example. So an image tag, img, short for image. Don't write the whole word image. It's called img. Right? So we have the image tag, and then you need to tell the browser where you can find the source file for that image, and that's src. Again, don't write the whole word source. It's called src. So src equals, and then we have the value of what it equals contained in double quotes. It's always going to be double quotes, except for very few instances. And that value can be whatever it is. In this case, it's a fictitious image, but I have a fully qualified URL at https://website.com. And then I begin once I've found the website, then I begin the directory and find the file. So I have a directory called images, and then a file called smile.png. So this is indeed an image file. There are a lot of different kinds of image files. If you put the wrong file extension, or if you have anything wrong in there whatsoever, the computer's not going to find it. If you're linking to someone else's image on someone else's website, shame on you, okay? That's frowned upon. You're stealing their bandwidth, using it for your own purposes. They can, if they notice that this is happening, they can disable it. And if they disable it and you don't realize it, you're going to have a broken website because you're stealing bandwidth from them. It's not illegal. It is frowned upon. They have the opportunity to turn it off, to enable or disable that with their DNS or their server settings. They can do that. Or they have the, if you're linking someone else's images directly, it's called hot linking. They also have the option of changing the file, leaving it up there, but then making it a different image. And you may not like what they turn it into, right? So don't link somebody else's images directly. If you are going to steal them, I suggest you download them and then re-upload them to your website. Then you're stealing the image, but you're not stealing the bandwidth and the image, okay? Fine line, right? So this next example here I have is a link. Links are called anchors, right? And they have a, you can just call it a link, or an anchor if you like, it doesn't matter. But they are a, so don't write the word link. Links are a tags, okay? And when you create a link on the web, you need to tell that little browser where the link goes when the user clicks on it, and that's called the href, right? So I have my attribute href equals, in this case, https://google.com, right? Some other attributes that I have set on this link, in addition to just the href, which tells the browser where the link goes, because I'm linking to a website that's not mine, a different website, I want to tell the browser to open up a new tab, and I do that by saying that the target for that link will be equal to _blank. This is a predefined value. There are a few others, but this is by far the most common one. Target equals _blank, which means it's going to open this link in a new tab. The standard, or what the internet has kind of agreed upon, is if you open a website that is on a different, if you open a link that's on a different website, you open a new tab. If you go to a link that stays on your website, you leave it in the same tab. So you would not put target equals blank for links that are internal to your page, to your website. And if you did open up a new tab every time somebody clicked links that were still in your website, they would get very annoyed very quickly. They'd click 2 or 3 links and they were like, why do I have all these tabs open? And unless they really need to be at your website, they're going to leave and never come back. In addition to that, I have these rel is set to no follow. This is going to be that when the new target opens up in the new tab, it is not going to, the data is not going to follow. So the new page is not going to get any data about where the link came from. It's not going to share any cookies, not going to get any information whatsoever, and this is going to help prevent some data mining or some hacking in that. It's very, very recommended that anytime you do a target link goes to another website, you make that a no follow link. For SEO or search engine optimization purposes, if you would check your website against like Google's SEO tests, if you have target blank links that go to another page, another website entirely, they're going to lower your ranking if you don't put no follow, because in their eyes this is a security issue. You got to turn it on. The original intent of the internet, it was not built in, so you have to do this on all of the links. It's not super difficult. You just put those in there. If you're using a content management system, oftentimes it'll be put in for you, so you don't have to worry about that too much. We're doing it by hand. We have to put that in there, right? So all of this, now that we have it, right, all of that, that's the starting tag for this element. We have the, and a quick reminder, All the attributes must be in the starting tag for the element. If you put them in the ending tag, you're not going to enjoy the results because it's not going to work. So you have to put them in the starting tag. That's where all the attributes go. So the starting tag is going to be very long on some of your elements. Immediately following the starting tag, I have the actual content. In this case, it's a link, so the content is text. It could be an image that's a link, but I'm just writing the word click. And then I'm closing the element here with a closing tag. Remember, it has that /. It has the same value there. So some quick notes about attributes. The syntax for them is always going to be the attribute name in lowercase equals, and then the value in double quotes. And the value, whether it's uppercase or lowercase, that's going to be dependent on what the value is. So if your website.com, if somewhere in the directory or the file name is uppercase, it has to be uppercase. It has to match. Or if you're setting some other values that need upper or lowercase or numerical values, whatever it is, it's just going to be whatever it is. That's what it is. So the attribute will be lowercase, but the value will be whatever it needs to be. And it's almost always going to be double quotes. On some rare occasions, if you're putting, for example, if you're putting JavaScript in the attribute, that JavaScript might have double quotes in it. And if you put a double quote inside of a double quote, it's going to prematurely end the double quote. So in that case, the simplest solution would be to use single quotes on the outside of the attribute value. And then you can use double quotes on the inside. Right? That's the simplest solution. It's not the only solution, but it's generally the simplest one that I find is to just do that. And there are some Boolean attributes which don't have set values. They're either on or off, true or false, enabled or disabled. And our next slide is about that. We have a few options that are at our disposal to set if you want to set a Boolean attribute. So Boolean is a true or false value, okay, from any kind of code languages, right? That's what a Boolean value is. And so some of the ways that we can set them that will be valid HTML, there are 4 ways. In this example, I'm using a div tag, and I'm setting the attribute item scope. And it's on or off, enabled, disabled, true or false, right? So the simplest option is going to be to just write the attribute name and don't put anything else. If the attribute name exists, it will be true and it will be valid HTML5. It's not going to be valid XML. It's not going to be valid the old XHTML either, because it's not valid XML. But it will be valid HTML5, right? The next one, which is my least favorite of these 4 options, is to do the attribute name equals the attribute name without quotes. This is going to work in HTML5. Again, it's invalid XML, and it's my least favorite because it does break the traditional syntax of using quotations around your value. Because, for example, there are some values that will have a space in them, and if you don't put the quotes on there, that's totally broken. So this breaks that syntax, and that's why it's my least favorite. The next one, we write the attribute name equals, and we put 2 double quotes, but we put nothing in them, not even a space. Right? This is going to be valid HTML and valid XML. Okay, this one's pretty good because it follows the full syntax of attributes that we've been using. And then the last one, by far the most verbose of them, is to write the attribute name equals, and then write the attribute name again in double quotes. And then this time, when you write the attribute name in those quotes, this time you have the option of writing it in whatever case you want. That part doesn't matter as long as it's spelled correctly. You'll put that in here, and that will be, again, valid HTML and also valid XML this time. This version is like over the top. This is the best way to do it, but it's the most verbose way to do it. Okay, this is the next best way to do it. The second most verbose, or the third most verbose. This is the simplest way to do it, option number 1, and then option number 2 is my least favorite way to do it. It's the second most verbose, but then the only thing you're omitting is the quotes, which I feel are very important. So if you're in my class, I don't want you to use number 2. My preference would be to use the fourth one, then the third one, and then the first one. All three of those would be fine. My preference would be to have valid XML at all times, just in case you ever need that in the future. And you won't have to update it. All right, so that's how you do Boolean values. And again, Boolean values are the ones that you just turn on. They're either true or false, on or off, enabled or disabled. They don't actually have a value to set. So this is how you set them. Now let's talk a little bit about how we can put elements inside of other elements, because that's a thing we can do. Now that we know how to write elements, we need to know that we can put them inside of each other. And you're going to put loads of elements inside of other elements. And the reasons you're going to do this are numerous. My simplest example right here is going to have a bulleted list. And the way you create the bulleted list is you have to say that, okay, first we're going to make a list, and then we have to make an element for each of the individual items that are in that list. So we have a parent element, the list itself, and then some number of child elements, or children, that are the individual items that are in this list. Okay, this is the simplest way to look at the hierarchy of elements, but they will, over time, they will get very, very complex. You're going to have multiple children, and those children can have multiple children, and those children can have multiple children. Sometimes it's not going to have, sometimes you'll have a complex set of parent-child relationship where this child has nothing, this child has tons of children of its own, this child will have nothing. Inside it gets the possibilities are really endless. Okay, let's talk about how it works, and then we'll go from there. So in this case, it's a bulleted list, or as it's actually called in the web, an unordered list. We have an unordered list, that's a bulleted list. We have an ordered list, that's a numbered list. Okay, so know that difference is there. The unordered list, UL, unordered list, that's what it's called. This is the name of the tag. I've started it here, and I have all the contents of it, and then I've ended it here. Okay, so the list itself, it doesn't have any contents. Its only contents are the child elements. In this case, sometimes you'll have elements that have their own content, plus they have child elements. Okay, and sometimes you'll have an element that has its own content, a child element, more content, more child elements, and so on. And again, the possibilities are endless. It's just what you want to design on your web page, right? What kind of content is in there? It can be in whatever order you need it to be. So in this case, very simple. We have the unordered list. Inside of it, we have 3 list items, LI tag, list item. We start the tag, put in its content, first bullet item. This is just text. It could be anything. It could be more complex. It could be an image. It could be a link. Could be multiple things in here. It could be a whole paragraph with an image and a link. It's a bulleted list. There's not a whole lot of rules on what you can put in here. You can put whatever you need to put in here. And then we close it. We close this child element before we open the next one. Very important that you don't overlap these tags, right? If we open the second one before we close the first one, we're actually putting that second one inside of the first one. Okay, so don't make that mistake. If you overlap 2 of the same element, what's going to happen is you'll open the first one, and then you'll do something. You'll open the second one, and then when you go to close, it's going to close the second one because that's the one that's closest. That's the opening tag that's closest to the first closing tag that matches. Okay, they match. When you do a closing tag in HTML, it's going to go back up the chain and it's going to close the very next opening tag that matches that closing tag. And if you have them out of order, you're going to get unexpected results in your browser when you actually look at the page. So don't put them out of order. Okay. If you have two different elements and you accidentally overlap them, it's going to break in some other unexpected way, because when you close the wrong tag, it's not going to work right. Sometimes it will actually orphan that first tag, artificially close it. The browser will do that, and then it will have this orphaned end tag, and it will artificially open that somewhere as well. And you'll have two kind of orphaned halves of an element when you thought you were only going to have one. So don't get those out of order. And then as long as you do get them in order, you can have as many children in your parent elements that you want, and those child elements can have their own child elements and so on. There really is no limit to the number of elements that can be on the page, to the number of elements that can be in a single parent-child relationship. There's no limit. The only limit is how much do you want to code and how big do you want your file size to be, how long do you want it to take for somebody to download. Right? That's the only limit, and you have to kind of impose that on yourself. If you make a bajillion elements all in one parent-child relationship all the way down the line, you save that in an HTML file, you put it on the web. If somebody wants to take the time that it takes to download it, however many seconds or minutes it takes, they'll download it and they'll look at your page. There's not a limit. It's just text. So that's a hierarchy. Let's have a look at, now that we know how to draw an individual element, how to give it attributes, and then how to put elements inside of each other, let's have a look at how the page of elements are made. Okay, the page of elements, okay, we're going to have the HTML page itself that is an HTML element that will wrap around all of the other content. Okay, the only child elements that will be directly inside the HTML element should be the head followed by the body. Head should come first, then the body. And the head element, you're only going to have one. The head element is going to contain pretty much all just the metadata about the page. So meta means data about data, right? And the head, all the elements inside the head are going to have an effect on the content below, but for the most part, you're not going to see anything in the head directly. There's one element, the title of the page, that you will. Title of the page is the text that goes up here in the tabs at the top of your browser. That gets set in the head. Other things that get set in the head are where the CSS files are, where JavaScript files are, some Facebook OG tags, so that if the page gets saved on Facebook, it tells Facebook some information, some character settings, some viewport settings to try and help define what the page is going to look like on mobile browsers, and some other settings that might be in the head. Right? Those are all things that should be invisible to the user, except for the title, and they all go in the head, and they're going to kind of define, they're going to have an effect on the content below. And all the content below that the user is going to see is in the body. And that's the body of the HTML page. That's the part that the user sees. That's the part that's going to have paragraphs and images and links and all that stuff. That's in the body. And then if we're going to have some CSS, some style sheets in the head, that is going to tell the browser how to display the content below. If we're going to have a character set in the head, which tells the browser which character set you're using, and pretty much we're all going to be using the same character set, UTF-8. That's going to tell the browser then how to read and how to define your page. You could use a different character set. We won't be, but you could. You can have some JavaScript in the head that may run and have some effect on the content below, but all the content is going to be below inside the body. There is some reasons why you would want to put maybe some CSS or some JavaScript at the end of the page. Okay, you might put some CSS at the end of the page because that's the only place you can put it. Ideally, all your CSS will be in the head. And for JavaScript, you might put some JavaScript at the end of the page because you have JavaScript that you don't want running at the beginning, slowing down your page for your users. You want to wait until the page has been displayed because our browsers are interpreters, right? They're going to display one thing at a time as they read it. It happens very fast nowadays, so you don't see it happening, but if you've ever seen like a dial-up connection downloading an image and see the image start loading from top to bottom, that's the browser interpreting it as it downloads. So if we put some of our JavaScript at the end of the page, we could delay the loading of that JavaScript for one, so the browser doesn't even have to load it off of the server. We're also going to delay the execution of the JavaScript until the end of the page. And so that may or may not be what we want to do with some pieces of JavaScript. We also have an option in the head. We can tell the JavaScript that it should be deferred, but that's for another video. Okay, so these are the basic page level elements, the HTML page itself, and that HTML page is going to have a head and a body. All of our content goes in the body, and all the metadata goes in the head. So here we have the anatomy of an HTML document. And let's go through line by line. We'll go through what each one does. I have a link here. It goes to the Mozilla developer page that has the same information, and it has the line by line description. The first thing is the doc type, or the document type. In the old days of the internet, there were much more document types that we're using. HTML4, HTML, XHTML 1.1 transitional, or XHTML 1.1 strict. And the document type would link to a set of rules that the browser would use in order to help define the content of your page, in order to pick out where errors might be in your page. And if you use the wrong document type, and then let's say you coded your page in the style of one document type, but then you wrote it in the style of another document type, you put the wrong document type in there, you may actually get some changes in display because the browser might think that some things are valid that aren't, or that are errors that aren't. Okay. In HTML5, that's kind of gone away, so now the doc type is just HTML, and it's probably going to be like that for a while. So we still need it for reverse compatibility, because if you don't include it, then the browser has to guess what document type it is, and that's why we're going to set a couple other things like this character set. We're going to set it to UTF-8. If you don't set it, that means the browser has to guess, and browsers are pretty smart, but they might guess wrong, and you don't want that to happen on your page. So that's why we're going to set the doc type, and we're going to set the character set. We'll get to that in a couple lines. So we have the document type. We're going to set it because we don't want the browser to guess and guess wrong ever for us. And it's very simple to do. It's trivial, right? And then we're going to begin the HTML element. We're going to have that opening tag of the HTML element itself. Now I have spaces and line breaks in between all of these. That's not required. If you have space in between elements, your browser there are some instances where that can be displayed or can cause display issues, but most of the time it's not an issue to have a space or a no space in between elements. Sometimes it can when you have positioned elements, okay? But we're not there yet. Right, so we're opening up the HTML. Immediately, we're going to open up the head, and we're going to start defining some of that metadata. And the previous slide, you may be thinking, well, why did he call it metadata? Because a lot of them literally are meta tags. Okay, so this one is a meta tag, which means it's data about the following data. How is this page, what character set is this page using? We're using UTF-8. UTF-8 is pretty much all the characters that we're ever going to use. Multiple languages are included in there, so this is what we were using. There's really no reason not to set this. Like I said, if you don't set this, you leave it up to the browser to guess, and there's a small chance that it might guess wrong on your page, and you don't want that to happen because then your page is going to look kind of weird. Right, so we just set that. It's, you can just copy and paste it from every other page you've ever created or from this page, and you don't really have to think about it too much. So just set it and forget it. Next element we have in the head is the title of the page. Right, so this title is called My Test Page. And this is literally copy and pasted from this link right here. Okay, so if you go look at the link, you'll see the exact same example. So the title would be the text that appears up in this tab at the top of your browser. It's going to be text. You can't put images up there. There is a favorite icon. There's an icon up there. That is a different tag that goes in the head, which I did not include in this example because it wasn't in the other example. But that's not part of the title. It's its own thing. So the title is only text. We have the opening tag and the closing tag. Okay, remember, get those in the correct order. And then we're finished with all the head information on this very basic page, so we close the head. Don't forget to close the head, otherwise your browser will have to figure it out for you. And generally, when we tell the browser to figure things out for us, it's hit or miss. So we want to be very explicit in our instructions to the browser. And there are multiple browsers, and most people are using Chrome these days, but that's not 100%. And so we do have to take into consideration that just because something works on one browser doesn't mean it will always work on every browser. So we close all of our elements like we're supposed to. And then since we closed the head, now it's time to open our body. And our body is going to contain all the information that is directly displayed to the user. And in this case, it's just an image. And so we have img tag for an image. It has an src, which tells us the source to find that image. This source, unlike my previous example, is not a fully qualified URL. It doesn't have https:// some website. It just says look in the images folder and then find this image, Firefox icon.png. Right? Now, where's the images folder? The browser knows where the file is that we're currently looking at. So it's going to say, all right, based on our current location, we're going to look in the images folder that is in the same location as our current location. And then inside of that folder, we'll find this image. Now, if we typed it wrong, or if that's not actually where the images folder is, then it's not going to find the image. Okay? If you have at the root of your domain, in the root folder, if you have an images folder, very common, we'll put an images folder and we'll put all of our images in there. If you want to set this link to start at the root, you can start with a slash. Anytime you start with a slash, it means go to the home directory, which will be website.com, home directory. Not the words home directory, website.com. That's the home directory. Start with a slash. And then immediately there, then we'll look for the images folder and then this image file. Okay, so I'm going to leave that out so that I can not save this like that because I want to talk about it. And then we have an alt. This is a new attribute for us. Alt is in the event that we don't find this image or it doesn't load for any reason whatsoever, we're going to display a piece of text that is the alternative to this image. And there could be multiple reasons for the image not to load. Maybe there's a failed internet connection. maybe there's a typo, maybe there's files corrupted on the server, or maybe the person is using a screen reader and they don't really, because they're visually impaired and they're not looking at images anyway, and so the screen reader will read the alt text back to them instead of the screen reader doesn't know what the image is. It only has what we tell it. So we provide an alt text. Okay. And then that's the only content that's in our body. So we don't forget to close the body. So we close the head, we close the body. The image tag, remember, it doesn't have content in the image. It's just an image. So it closed itself, or was a single tag anyway. And then once the body is closed, there's nothing else left for us to do except to close the HTML itself. And then hopefully that's the end of the file and we don't have anything else. So this is going to be a super basic page that has kind of all the minimum requirements that we need. And now that we have the page, let's talk about a few of the basic building blocks that we can use in our page. So in the most basic HTML page, we've kind of seen an image, but we'll talk a lot more about those later. We're going to have headings, we're going to have paragraphs, and we might have some line breaks. And the headings, there's a bunch of H's for headings. We have H1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. H1 is the biggest text and the most important text. Generally, you are only going to have one H1 tag on a page. That's the title of the page itself. For search engine optimization reasons, they really only want one, and they want it to be the title of the page. And then if you have multiple sections, or if you have multiple uses of a heading tag, you'll get progressively smaller in priority of those headings. So 1 is the most important, 6 is the least important. Generally, H1, H2, and kind of H3 are all that's used. Very rarely do we need more than that ever. Unless you have a page that needs it because you have many sections in there, you might use more, but those basically denote the hierarchy of information that's on your page if they have text headings as you go through your page. And then underneath all those headings, you're probably going to have paragraphs of text. The paragraph tag is P for paragraph. That's going to, remember, open the paragraph and close the paragraph. Make sure that you're opening and closing paragraphs and you're not overlapping. And if you have other elements inside of your paragraph, make sure you're not overlapping elements. You're going to get some unexpected results. Specifically with paragraphs, they're the most common thing to be accidentally overlapped. That and div tags, those are the two most common things to be accidentally overlapped. And if you accidentally open and close them in the wrong order, your browser is going to, sometimes it will create orphan paragraphs before and after, and it will just kind of auto-close it. Other times you're going to get some other result. Right? So make sure you're opening and closing them in the right order and you're not overlapping them. And paragraphs do include a little bit of space above the paragraph and a little bit of space below. So we don't need the line break in between paragraphs, but we might want a line break inside of a paragraph. If for any reason we write a paragraph, one paragraph, we want a line break in it, we want to turn one paragraph into two for some reason, we will put the line break inside the paragraph. We don't need them between the paragraph unless we just want to create more space. The line break isn't the best tool to create extra space, but it is the easiest tool to create extra space. And then the line break, again, if you want it to be XML valid, or I spent my formative years writing in XHTML, and so I have a habit of always using this closing slash at the end of self-closing tags, but in HTML5 it is not required. And then I have a link right here to a nice description of that. And that is the end of Chapter 2 in my series here. Chapter 2, Part 1. I'll come back in and talk about the second part of Chapter 2 later. We'll talk about more of of some of the elements that are available to us, but I felt it was important to break apart the definition of how we write elements from introducing you to 10 different elements. And so broke this into 2 videos. See you next time.